A wedding, a bride with a secret, a groom with a past, and a sister, a decorated general who no longer needed a salute to command the room. She thought she was just a guest. But by the end of the night, she became the headline. She called me a gate guard in front of 200 people, the general recalls. Mocked my career, my sacrifice, my silence, but what they didn't know was that I outranked everyone in that room. And just when the laughter settled, the groom, her sister's new husband, stood up, faced her with steady eyes, and said one word that silenced them all. "Ma'am, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about betrayal in plain sight, and what happens when a woman who spent her life being erased decides to speak louder than the whispers." In this video, you'll witness a journey of quiet strength, broken family ties, and the moment one woman turned pain into policy, not for applause, but so others wouldn't have to walk through silence alone. If you've ever been dismissed, sabotaged, or told to shrink so someone else could shine, this one's for you. Drop a comment and share your own experience. Don't forget to like and subscribe because your story, like hers, deserves to be heard. It was supposed to be a simple evening, a wedding like any other. Fairy lights draped across the garden, soft music in the background, champagne bubbling in tall glasses. But beneath the perfect setting was a storm waiting to break. And right in the middle of it was her. General Rebecca Cole, a 2-star officer. A woman who'd commanded entire battalions in war zones, but couldn't command an ounce of respect at her own sister's wedding. She hadn't expected much. She'd shown up quietly, wearing civilian clothes, her hair pinned back neatly, her medals left at home. She didn't want to draw attention. She just wanted to be present. To support her sister, Haley, despite their years of distance. But some people see humility as weakness. Some people weaponize family. And Haley had come prepared to do just that. It happened during the speeches. The microphone passed from hand to hand, the usual stories, the laughter, the sweet toasts. Then it was Haley's turn. And what started as a sentimental nod quickly twisted into something colder. "And of course, we're so lucky to have my sister here tonight. You all know Becky, I mean the gate guard." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rebecca sat still. The smile on her face didn't crack, but something behind her eyes shifted. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. The way Haley said it, like her service, her rank, her sacrifice, was a joke. A punchline. The gate guard. What no one in that garden knew was that Rebecca had commanded combat operations overseas, that she had saved lives, including one very specific life that would come back into focus before the night was over. She didn't react. She didn't storm out. Years of discipline taught her that silence can be louder than rage. But someone else noticed. The groom. Andrew. A man Rebecca hadn't seen in years. Because once, long ago, before he was Haley's husband, he had served under Rebecca's command in Helmand Province. He owed her his life. And maybe he hadn't forgotten. The dinner continued. The toasts ended. But something in the air shifted. You could feel it, that crackle right before thunder. And then, right before the cake cutting, Andrew did something no one expected. He stood up, glass in hand, cleared his throat, then turned directly toward Rebecca. And bowed. Not a nod. Not a toast. A full, deliberate bow. The kind a soldier gives to someone they respect, the kind that carries weight. "Ma'am," he said. Just one word. But it cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd fell quiet. Haley froze. Rebecca didn't move. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, the entire room remembered something. Titles may change, but honor doesn't fade. And sometimes, the people you try to humiliate are the very people who once saved you. That single gesture unraveled everything Haley had built: the image, the story, the control. And it was only the beginning. Rebecca didn't come to the wedding to make a statement. She came out of habit, out of some lingering sense of family duty. But what she left with was clarity. That night was more than personal. It was public. It was a mirror reflecting everything she'd endured, the erasure, the silence, the whispers behind her back. She'd been the quiet one for too long. The one who didn't make scenes. The one who let others speak over her, rewrite her story, bury her achievements under forced humility. But not anymore. Because what happened at that wedding, that moment of public disrespect, wasn't new. It was just the first time others saw what she had lived for years. It was the tip of a much deeper betrayal. And Rebecca Cole? She was done being quiet. After the wedding, Rebecca didn't sleep. Not because of the humiliation, that part had stopped stinging years ago, but because of what it confirmed. The way Haley smiled as she said those words. The way she glanced around for laughs. The way Andrew bowed, not just to honor Rebecca, but to quietly expose the truth. It was all too familiar. Rebecca had seen this pattern before. And it had nearly ended her career. The next morning, she didn't call, didn't text. She requested a quiet booth at a diner near the base, the kind of place with weak coffee and strong memories. Haley showed up 10 minutes late, sunglasses on, her mouth stretched into a forced smile. Rebecca didn't return it. She waited in silence as her sister slid into the booth, acting like this was just another awkward family moment. Haley started with a joke. Tried to brush it off, said it was just a bit. That she went too far. That the gate guard thing wasn't meant to hurt. Rebecca didn't respond. She simply reached into her folio and slid a page across the table. One sheet, thick paper, faint army watermark. Haley leaned in, eyebrows raised. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, a little laugh in her voice. Rebecca's tone didn't waver. "An anonymous letter," she said. "Sent 7 years ago. To the Army whistleblower hotline. Claimed I faked deployment records. Said I lied about Helmand, that my Bronze Star was political." Haley went pale. Blinked. Still tried to scoff. "I've never seen that." Rebecca didn't blink. "You have," she said. "You wrote it." Haley's mouth opened, then shut. "It's anonymous. Anyone." Rebecca slid a second page forward. AI linguistic analysis. 96% match. Sentence density, word choice. And one giveaway. Haley stared at the words circled in red ink, irregardless. "You always said that," Rebecca added quietly. "Even in high school essays." For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the clink of a spoon from another table. Haley shifted in her seat, her face tight. "I was angry," she said at last. "You were always the favorite. Dad bragged about you to everyone. The soldier, the star. I just wanted space to be seen." Rebecca looked at her. "So you buried me?" Haley looked down. "I didn't know it would stall your promotion." Rebecca inhaled slowly. "It didn't just stall it, it erased it. My file went dark for almost a year. No explanation. No apology. Just silence." Haley didn't apologize. She didn't deny it, either. Rebecca stood. "You did what you had to do to feel big," she said. "But you forgot something. I don't shrink." Later that evening, she met Andrew again. This time on a rooftop bar, away from the noise. The city blinked below them. The wind stirred the edge of her jacket. Andrew stood with a drink in his hand, looking like a man who understood what regret tasted like. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "You asked," she replied. They didn't speak for a while. Not until the weight settled between them. "I never told Haley about Helmand," he said finally. "About what you did. About the minefield." Rebecca nodded. "I figured. I didn't want her turning it into some story," he continued. "Something to use. You deserved better." She looked at him. "Then why marry her?" He let out a breath. "Because she was easy. Because I was tired of chaos. Because I thought safe was better than real." "She's not safe," Rebecca said. "She's calculated." "I know," he whispered. "I figured that out too late." Rebecca studied him for a long second. Then she said it plainly. She sent the tip. He nodded. I always suspected. I have proof, she added. He gripped the railing, knuckles white. I stood up last night because if I didn't, I would have become just like her. Rebecca looked at him one last time. Don't ever use my name to cover your silence again. Then she turned and walked away. By the next day, the media had found her. Word had spread. A general mocked at a wedding. The groom bowing in full view. It had gone viral. Rebecca could have ignored it she wanted to. But something stirred. For years, she'd let her family write the story. Now it was time to write her own. At the airport, just before boarding, she stepped to a nearby podium. Small, unused. A flag draped behind it. The cameras clicked. The questions flew. She waited. Then she spoke. I'm not my family's failure, she said, voice steady. I am their silence made visible. She paused, looked into the cameras. I served my country while being erased from my own story. I earned every rank in blood, not approval. And today, I'm launching something new, the Resilience Foundation. More cameras. More silence. A place for soldiers betrayed not in war, but at home. A place where we say, you are not too dramatic, too emotional, too much. You are seen. You still serve. You still matter. The headlines exploded. But Rebecca wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing something far more powerful. Justice. And this time, it was coming with her name on it. The Pentagon was colder than she remembered, not in temperature, but in spirit. Rebecca stood behind a steel lectern in a windowless room lined with brass and polished wood. Her presentation was simple. No dramatics, no flourishes. Just the truth, laid bare in clean slides and calm sentences. She introduced the Resilience Protection Protocol, a three-tier system that offered legal protection, mental health support, and career safeguards for military personnel who had been sabotaged by those closest to them. She spoke clearly, not just as a general, but as someone who had lived the silence she was now trying to break. Some of the suits took notes. Some crossed their arms. One admiral, skeptical and stiff, questioned her directly. With all due respect, General Cole, he said, this sounds personal. She didn't blink. All policy is personal, she replied. Or it's propaganda. The room shifted. That kind of honesty wasn't common in places like this, but it landed. She showed the numbers: discharged soldiers after family betrayals, psychological breakdowns ignored, careers ended with no formal complaint, only whispers. The kind of whispers that never made it to official reports but still destroyed lives. Then she ended it with a single line. We train our people to survive war. It's time we protect them from peace. The room didn't erupt. It never does in places like that. But when the Undersecretary of Defense leaned forward and said, we'll fund it, that was all the validation she needed. A week later, Rebecca found herself standing in front of her childhood home. The lawn was perfect, as always. Her mother's pride. A symbol of control dressed in hydrangeas and fresh mulch. When the front door opened, Barbara Cole didn't wear her pearls. She looked smaller now. Softer. No makeup, just a cardigan and tired eyes. Come in, she said. Rebecca hesitated, then stepped inside. The house smelled like lemon polish and old secrets. They didn't go far, just the front room. No hugs, no tea, just 2 chairs and decades between them. Barbara spoke first. I didn't know how to protect you, she said quietly. You were loud in a world that punished loud women. Rebecca looked at her. I wasn't loud, she replied. I was visible. That's not the same thing. Her mother's hands trembled slightly in her lap. We thought if we distanced you, the scandal would fade. You could still have a life. You didn't erase me, Rebecca said. You just made me unforgettable. Then came the sound of steps on the stairs. Haley. Barefoot. Wrapped in a robe, silent as ever. She didn't speak. Neither did Rebecca. Their mother glanced between them, then sighed. She hasn't been the same since the wedding. Rebecca's voice was steady. She never had to be anything. I had to survive. Barbara looked up, her eyes glassy. Is there anything I can do now? Rebecca stood. Yes. Don't rewrite my story after I'm gone. Don't say I was distant. Don't say it was complicated. Say you made a choice. And so did I. She walked to the door. No hugs, no goodbyes. Just the sound of boots on old wood floors. She didn't slam the door. That, too, was a choice. The Resilience Foundation held its first public meeting at a local community center. Nothing fancy, just mismatched chairs, buzzing lights, and burnt coffee. But it was full. Soldiers, spouses, students. A few in uniform, most in plain clothes. Rebecca rolled up her sleeves and stepped to the front, standing beneath a crooked banner that read, "We don't erase the wounded. We empower them." She looked out over the room. "You are not what they said you are," she began. "You are not unstable, not dramatic, not too much. You are witnesses, and we don't shame witnesses anymore. We train them to lead." One girl, barely 17, raised her hand. Her voice cracked as she told them about her sister discharged after trying to report harassment, labeled too emotional, left without recourse. "We still have the letters," she said. "But no one will take her case." Rebecca stepped closer. "Bring them to us. We'll take it from here." The ripple in the room was quiet but powerful. Not applause, not cheering. Just recognition. Then someone's phone buzzed. The video of Rebecca's airport speech had gone viral. 20, 0 views. Then 50. Headlines were popping up. Major General Cole still serving without saluting anyone. Rebecca glanced at the screen, then back at the crowd. "Let them watch," she said with a quiet smile. "Let them finally understand who we've always been." Because now, no one would silence this story again. The National Defense Symposium was never meant to feel emotional. It was stiff suits, quiet whispers, policy briefings, and panels that dragged. But that day, the room felt different. Veterans sat beside policymakers. Survivors next to senators. A strange unity filled the space, like people knew something real was about to be said. Rebecca stood center stage, no notes, just presence. A single flag hung behind her. No armor, no rank. Just the woman who had once been erased, now writing the new rules. "I was once told blood is thicker than water," she began. "As if drowning in blood somehow hurts less." A ripple moved through the room. Eyes locked on her. "Families are supposed to protect," she continued. "But sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from a foreign enemy. It comes from someone who shares your last name. Your dinner table, your childhood wall." She paused, not for effect, but to breathe. Because this wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. "The most dangerous betrayal isn't loud," she said. "It's polite. It smiles at weddings. It stays silent at funerals, and it demands that you disappear for everyone else's comfort." Another silence. Not empty, just full. Then she added, "And I disappeared. Not because I was ashamed, but because I refused to play the role they wrote for me. I refused to let them survive their lies by burying my truth." Some people looked away. Others leaned in. "I'm here today," she said, "because I'm working with lawmakers on a federal protection bill. One that recognizes sabotage doesn't always come from enemies overseas, but sometimes from the people who claim to love us. This bill will protect careers, reputations, and lives from being quietly destroyed by silence dressed as loyalty." She stepped back slightly. "Let the air settle. I was once their secret," she said softly. "Now I am their sentence." The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. Like something heavy had finally been named. In the crowd, Barbara sat quietly. Her hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't brought Haley. She didn't take notes. But she didn't look away. Backstage, a young reporter waited near the curtain. As Rebecca stepped off stage, the woman approached. Would you ever go back to them? She asked. Rebecca didn't hesitate. I never left myself, she said. And that was the real answer. Weeks passed. Headlines came and went. Some praised her, some questioned her, but none ignored her anymore. On the Amalfi Coast, in a quiet stone cottage overlooking the sea, Rebecca found peace not in retreat, but in clarity. The waves below whispered like old friends. The air carried lemon and salt. She painted in the mornings. Nothing perfect, just color where there had once been shadow. A journal sat open near the window, filled with the parts of her story no one else got to edit. A boy from the village knocked one day, brought her bread and olives, asked shyly, "Sora, were you really a general?" Rebecca smiled. Once. Now I'm just someone who fought for herself. Later, she listened to a message from Washington. A voice offering a prestigious appointment. Power. Influence. She deleted it. Not out of anger, but freedom. At the desk, she dipped her pen. Wrote one final line. I walked alone, but not lost. Then she stepped out into the sun. No spotlight, no salute, just a woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to be seen. The sun was starting to dip when she heard the soft knock again. Same time as the day before. Same basket. Lucas stood there, barefoot this time, grinning as if he'd just come from chasing waves. She smiled and thanked him, not just for the bread, but for the reminder that life could still be simple, still be kind. After he ran off, she stayed by the doorway for a moment, letting the breeze curl around her ankles, letting the air remind her of who she'd become, someone who no longer flinched at quiet. Inside, the cottage was still. The kind of stillness that had nothing to prove. The kind that came when you weren't waiting for applause. On the desk sat the folded newspaper from Rome. Her face was on page 7. The headline was small, but clear. General Cole pushes for family betrayal protections, a first in military policy. She didn't open it, she didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't in ink, it was in motion. Later that evening, she logged into the Resilience Foundation portal. Dozens of messages waited, some were short. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. Others were long, stories of sisters, brothers, spouses, parents, people who had betrayed not with knives, but with silence. One message stopped her. It was from a young soldier. Just 3 lines. They said I imagined it. They said I was too sensitive. But then I saw your speech. Now I believe myself again. She closed her eyes. Let that sink in. Not praise, not fame, but proof that truth, once spoken, echoes into places even shame can't hide. The next morning, the email from the Pentagon came again. This time, not from General Simmons, but from the President's senior advisor. The Joint Ethics Board. Chair position. A full mandate. Her call. No strings. She stared at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a quiet invitation. Then she replied. 1 sentence. Only if I can rewrite the terms. She hit send. Later, she stood at the edge of the terrace, coffee in hand, watching the sea move like it knew every version of her. And maybe it did. The young cadet who once hid her pain in excellence. The officer who learned to stand tall without applause. The sister who'd been sacrificed for someone else's comfort. And now, the woman who no longer needed saving. She had become her own anchor. Behind her, the wind rustled the Resilience Foundation banner she'd brought with her, just a small corner of it tucked into her travel bag like a flag worth flying anywhere. The message was still clear. We don't erase the wounded, we empower them. She didn't think much about Haley anymore. Some wounds don't heal. They settle. Like quiet scars. You don't forget, but you stop letting them bleed. And as for Barbara, maybe one day they'd speak again. Or maybe not. But Rebecca had made peace with the idea that healing wasn't about returning to the people who broke you. It was about no longer needing their permission to feel whole. Her journal was full now. Page after page. Story after story. Not just war stories, but human ones. She didn't need to publish them, didn't need a memoir. Because the truth was already moving without her, carried in policies, whispered in briefings, studied in classrooms, and spoken by soldiers who now knew they weren't alone. She smiled softly and whispered to the wind, almost like a benediction. They tried to silence me. Instead, they gave me volume. And then she walked back inside. Not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as herself, complete, steady, and finally free. The days passed gently. No alarms, no sudden orders, just the soft rhythm of the sea and the calm she had never been allowed to feel in uniform. Mornings started with coffee on the terrace. Afternoons with slow walks through the village, nodding to locals who didn't care who she used to be. In the quiet, she was not a headline, not a title, not someone's disappointment. She was simply Rebecca. One afternoon, while sitting beneath a lemon tree sketching the coastline, a letter arrived. Not an email. A real letter, in an envelope slightly wrinkled, hand-addressed in delicate, familiar cursive. It was from Barbara. Her hands hesitated over the seal. Not out of fear, but from a deep knowing that whatever was inside, it wouldn't change the past. Still, she opened it. The note was short, barely a paragraph. "You were right," it began. "About everything. I tried to protect the family, but I see now it was never you who needed protection. I'm sorry. Not for what I did, but for how long I pretended it didn't happen." But there was no request for contact. No guilt-soaked apology tour. Just a truth, quietly delivered. And oddly, that felt enough. She placed the letter in her journal, not as a keepsake, but as a record. Because the story didn't end with apology. It moved forward on choices. Later that week, she returned briefly to the U.S. The Pentagon had scheduled a closed-door meeting with ethics leaders and military support teams. They wanted her insight not just as a policymaker, but as someone who had lived the cracks in the system. As she entered the building, the same halls that once felt cold now felt neutral. She didn't belong to them anymore, but she didn't fear them either. Power had shifted, not because she demanded it, but because she'd outlived the silence. The room was full. Mid-level officers, legal staff, even a few civilian advocates. A young major approached her during the break, eyes wide with nervous energy. "Ma'am, I followed your case. Read everything I could. My sister's in the Navy, she's dealing with. Well, let's just say your work matters more than you know." Rebecca smiled, warm but firm. "Then make sure she never has to choose between her truth and her rank." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." Back at her hotel, she took off the blazer, kicked off the heels, and stood barefoot on the cool tile. Her reflection in the window looked calmer now. Older, yes, but lighter. Not because the weight was gone, but because she no longer carried it alone. That evening, she received a video from a Resilience Foundation circle in Kansas. It was grainy, filmed in a church basement, but the room was full veterans, family members, survivors. At the center, a woman shared her story of being discredited after reporting abuse from her husband, a decorated officer. "They said I was unstable," she said, voice steady. "But now I know, I was just early." The camera panned as the room broke into applause, not because the story was over, but because it had been heard. Rebecca sat back, letting the sound fill her chest. The fight hadn't ended with a podium or a press release. It had simply changed shape. She opened her laptop. A new bill was in early drafting stages, the Cole Act. Focused on protecting military personnel from personal sabotage, ensuring legal representation for internal betrayal, and expanding mental health access. It had bipartisan support, quiet momentum, real legs. And it had her name. But more importantly, it carried the names of those who never got the microphone. The ones who'd been forced into silence for the sake of appearances, rank, or shame. She took a breath. then began to type a note for her next speech, not for the Senate, not for generals, but for the next support circle. The ones in rooms with mismatched chairs, burnt coffee, and open hearts. Because healing doesn't happen in headlines. It begins in rooms like that. And that's where she'd keep showing up. The morning of the vote arrived quietly. No grand parades, no reporters waiting at the gate. Just Rebecca sitting in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from Capitol Hill, sipping black coffee and watching the city wake up. Her phone buzzed with updates, orders confirming, allies checking in, but she didn't reply right away. She knew the numbers were close, but she also knew this wasn't about winning a headline. It was about planting something deeper, something that could outlive her. By the time she walked into the hearing room, most of the seats were filled. Some familiar faces nodded respectfully, others barely glanced her way. That didn't matter. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to be clear. She took her seat near the back. Today, she wasn't testifying. Today, others would speak: commanders, military spouses, mental health advocates. Some had found their courage through her foundation. Others had walked through fire on their own. But all of them carried stories that mattered. One by one, they stood at the microphone. A sergeant shared how his wife leaked classified details during a custody battle. A medic described how her career stalled after reporting a partner's emotional abuse. A young airman talked about nearly taking his own life after being called unstable by someone he once loved. Each story landed like a quiet hammer. No yelling, no theatrics, just truth after truth, steady and sharp. Rebecca watched it all. Her hands never folded, her eyes never wavered. These people weren't her followers, they were proof. Proof that betrayal wasn't a private shame. It was a public cost. When the vote was called, the room held its breath. The tally was read slowly, each name echoing against the walls. And when the final number landed just enough to pass, there was no explosion of cheers. Just a long, collective exhale. A letting go. She didn't smile. Not right away. Instead, she stood and made her way out of the room, past the reporters beginning to gather. One of them called out, "General Cole, any reaction to today's decision?" She paused, then turned just slightly. "This isn't the end," she said simply. "This is the beginning of being believed." Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. She walked down the steps slowly, her boots quiet against the stone. At the bottom, a familiar face waited. Andrew. He wore no uniform, just a button-down shirt and that same tired look from the rooftop bar. But this time, something was different. "I watched the vote," he said. "You did it." Rebecca didn't stop walking, but her voice was soft. "We did it." He walked beside her for a while, silence sitting easily between them. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "I think about what is. That's enough." They reached the corner. He turned to go, but paused. "I'm proud of you," he said. She didn't say thank you. She just nodded. Because some things don't need wrapping, they just need to land. That evening, back in her apartment, she stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Her name was trending again, not for scandal, not for survival, but for change. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The days that followed were quieter. Not empty, just quieter. Rebecca spent them in a small cottage by the sea, far from Washington, far from the headlines. The air smelled of salt and lemons. The walls held no medals, no framed certificates, just soft sunlight and the rustle of paper from a journal she was slowly filling. She painted in the mornings, walked in the afternoons, and in the evenings, she sat by the open window, listening to the waves below. No meetings, no decisions, just breath, just being. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Luca, the boy from the village, stood there holding a small basket bread, olives, and a folded newspaper tucked between them. He beamed up at her, gap-toothed and full of curiosity. "Sora," he asked, "were you really a general?" Rebecca smiled. "Once," she said gently. "Now, I'm just someone who fought for herself." That seemed to satisfy him. He ran off before she could say more. Inside, she set the basket down and glanced at the paper. Her name was on the front page again. Not as a headline, as a legacy. The vote had sparked national discussion. Military boards were being reviewed. Policies rewritten. The resilience protocol was being adopted at bases across the country. But none of that was why she'd come here. She came to remember herself before the war, before the betrayal, before the silence, and maybe, for the first time, to learn who she was without needing to be strong all the time. Later that evening, her old army-issued phone buzzed. She hadn't used it in weeks. The screen lit up with a single message. "The President's office wants to appoint you to the Joint Ethics Board. You'd chair it. Think about it. Simmons." She read it once, then again, then deleted it. There was freedom in knowing you didn't owe your story to anyone anymore. She walked to the terrace, the sea glowing under the fading light. Her journal lay open on the table, the final page still blank. She dipped the pen, held it still for a moment, then wrote one last line. "I walked alone, but not lost." She closed the book, tucked it away, and let the breeze catch the edges of her hair. No applause, no microphones. Just the sound of a woman who had been silenced learning to return not to them, but to herself. A few weeks later, Rebecca stood at the edge of a community center auditorium. The folding chairs were mismatched. The lights buzzed overhead. The coffee in the corner had burned slightly. But the room was full veterans, cadets, civilians, some in uniform, most not. A banner behind her hung crooked. "The Resilience Foundation. We don't erase the wounded, we empower them." She rolled her sleeves up, just enough to show she wasn't here as a general, but not so far that she forgot she ever was. She stepped forward, calm and grounded. The room fell quiet, not from fear, but from recognition. "You are not what they said you are," she began. "You are not broken. You are not unstable. You are not too much. You are witnesses. And we don't silence witnesses anymore, we train them to lead." In the second row, a teenage girl raised her hand. Her voice trembled. "My sister tried to report harassment. They said she was too emotional. Then they sent her home." Rebecca nodded gently. "Bring her case to us, we'll carry it the rest of the way." Then a man in his 50s stood up. Broad-shouldered, eyes tired but kind. "My son saw your speech," he said. "He said maybe the system's finally listening." Rebecca smiled. "Tell him he wasn't wrong. The system failed him, but we won't." Someone in the back filmed with their phone. Rebecca didn't mind. Let them. This wasn't a secret anymore. This was the start of something. Her phone buzzed again, another headline. "Major General Cole's still serving, without saluting anyone." The video had gone viral. She looked up at the room. Dozens of people staring back, not with awe, but with hope, and in that moment, she understood something clearly. Her power didn't come from her rank. It came from her choice to speak. She didn't need revenge. She had presence. She had truth. And finally, she had peace. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a wedding or a cruel joke, it was about a woman who refused to stay silent. General Rebecca Cole faced betrayal not on the battlefield, but at her own family's table. And still, she rose. She didn't seek revenge. She built something greater, a legacy that protects others from the same kind of quiet destruction. The core message? You are not defined by those who tried to diminish you. You are defined by how you choose to stand after they do. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or betrayed by family, you're not alone. And your story isn't over. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind you your voice matters, your truth matters. And no one can silence it but you.